What's up, Daily Dosers? We're coming at you from Romans chapter 12 today. This series is talking about what do we do when the storms of life hit. And I think one thing that I've found especially meaningful in working with high schoolers now for the past 9 years is oftentimes when we come up against storms or conflicts, how prepared we were on the front end dictates a lot about how we respond in the middle of it. And let me read this passage for you, Romans chapter 12. It says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy," so that's the therefore. Everything previously in the book is talking about God's mercy. It's about God's redemptive plan for us. God saved us. He's redeemed us. He's bought us back. He's made us new. He's forgiven us because of what he's done. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When I read this, for me, there's a hint of the understanding of suffering in the midst of it, of if we continually kind of steep ourselves in what suffering means in terms of a secular lens, or suffering, if we get a bad understanding of what suffering is, if we think suffering is, it's simply karma, or suffering is, it doesn't really have meaning, it's accidental, it's all these things. Or we try to make sense of it in the middle of it, or we try to respond to it, and sometimes in suffering we'll numb it, we'll drink it away, we'll smoke it away, we'll deny it, we'll create really bad internal negative thoughts towards it. And I love how Romans puts it right here. It says, if you want to test what God's will is, or what God's thinking in something, or where God is in something, it doesn't seem to say wait until the middle of the trial and then start to ask questions about what these things mean. It says, and these words are passive, it says, be transformed, be conformed, the renewing of your mind, then you'll be able to test what God's will is. And there's a lot of this just indwelling in who God is, indwelling in what God's scripture says about it, almost to the point where when it's time for us to get cut by suffering, or time for us to get hit by suffering, that when we bleed the truth of the scriptures. And for me, I think that's one thing that I've found especially meaningful in my life when it's come to suffering is if you wait until the moment where your knees hit the floor and you're broken and you feel that extreme loss or that really bad diagnosis, or there's just these pivotal moments where you know in your heart, my life just changed dramatically. A really easy way that a guy named Packer once put it is he said, suffering is one of two things. It's either getting something you don't want or not getting something that you do. And those can happen in remedial things or secondary things. You know, I wanted a candy bar and I couldn't afford it today, or I wanted the promotion, I didn't get it. But I'm talking about bigger things. When you didn't want that diagnosis and you got it, or you wanted that marriage to work out and it didn't. That kind of suffering. If you wait for that moment, our emotions are they're betrayers. They betray us so quickly. So Jeremiah 17 says about our heart, and if you're in the middle of suffering, you feel this. I know that you do, or you have, or you will, where your first instinct is not going to be, for some reason, like our default setting is not truth, it's lies. Our default setting is lies. Going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when we experience that suffering, we turn to lies and not to truth. And so the way that we counteract that is we have to get the truth so firmly fixed in us that when we start to bleed and when we start to suffer, we refer back to our default setting to be truth instead of lies. And it says, here's how you do that. You have to be transformed by renewing your mind. That's this daily renewal, that we daily intake the truth of God. We make sense of suffering, even when we're not suffering. We make sense of God's ultimate plan. We make sense of sin in the world. We make sense of God's ultimate plan. We make sense of all these things so that when it hits, even though our emotions, our heart wants to take us away from the cross, that our mind and our understanding takes us back to his feet. So I would challenge you, if you're in the middle of it, work, be in community, think, process, read. And if you're not, don't wait. Because when you're in the middle of the storm is a bad time to think about how you might sail through storms. It's training on the front end. It's practice. It's a daily renewing that'll get us ready for the storms of this life. So you might think, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not hurt right now. I think this applies to us even all the more. How are we going to be ready when the storm hits? We'll see you guys tomorrow.